They told everyone I had vanished, yet I was only 7 hours away, paying for the roof over their heads while they prayed for my soul. For 6 years, I was the golden daughter, the nurse who never said no to overtime, the one whose silence was bought with the currency of expectation. My mother, Evelyn, didn't need to lie, she simply mastered the art of omission, letting our small-town church assume the worst while I silently fueled their lifestyle from 3 states away. I was the family bank, the secret provider, the daughter who made it out only to realize I had traded my independence for a gilded cage. It wasn't until the floor fell out from under my own life that I finally understood the price of their version of love. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I stopped being the family ATM and discovered that the truth is the only thing that can set you free. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The arrangement began at my college graduation, a milestone that should have been marked by celebration but was instead the moment I signed a lifetime contract. My mother handed me a cream-colored envelope, empty, with a look of maternal warmth that felt like a blessing. She told me it was for the house, for the family that had sacrificed so much to help me reach the finish line. I, naive and desperate to remain the pride of the household, began filling that envelope every single month. It was $1,400 at first, rising to $2,000 when the heating bills surged or my father, Thomas, needed a new transmission for his truck. I worked night shifts at the intensive care unit, trading every holiday and double shift for the money to keep the facade of our stability intact. I kept a ledger, not because I wanted the money back, but because numbers were the only things in our house that remained honest. I watched my friends travel and build their lives while I spent my earnings on a roof I had never lived under, convinced that being needed was the same as being loved. My life changed the day I met David, a builder with sawdust in his hair and an integrity that made me question everything I had been raised to believe. He didn't ask about my salary, he asked about my dreams. When he proposed, he didn't offer a diamond, he offered a brass key to a fixer-upper with a porch he promised to sit on with me for 40 years. I said yes to the key, believing that I could finally carve out a space that belonged only to us. But the transition to my own life only deepened the hold my mother had on my conscience. When I moved away, the monthly transfers continued, and when I dared to be 3 days late, my mother's voice turned cold and precise. She told me I didn't have the right to be tired because I was the one who had made it out. I stood in my own kitchen, exhausted from keeping strangers alive, and apologized to her for the crime of needing a few hours of sleep. I was 29 years old, yet I was still the child who had to earn her place at the table by paying for the privilege of existing. The breaking point arrived in a way that defied any preparation. David was killed in a construction accident, a sudden, brutal punctuation to a life that had been full of promise. He was gone before the ambulance reached the hospital, leaving me with a mortgage I couldn't afford and a grief that rendered the world silent. My family did not come to the funeral, they sent flowers that were signed by an aunt, as if my loss were a chore to be delegated. Just 4 days after I buried the man who had been my home, my mother texted me to ask if my monthly transfer would be late. I read her words while clutching one of his flannel shirts, and for the first time, the numbness gave way to a clarity that chilled my blood. 2 weeks later, I discovered I was pregnant, a miracle that felt like a heavy stone in my chest. I knew then that I had to stop the cycle, but when I tried to explain that I could no longer fund their life, my mother hung up on me. My father, when reached, only told me not to upset her. In that moment, I realized the road out of their world was one way. I spent the next 4 years in Asheville, building a life of quiet, deliberate peace. I painted my front door the color of a robin's egg and filled the rooms with the laughter of my daughter, Clara. I kept my head down, working my shifts and raising my girl, while in Ohio, my mother crafted the story of my disappearance. She told the church I had fallen into trouble, that I had been led away by a man, or that I had simply abandoned them. She wept at the right moments and let others fill in the blanks with their own judgments. I remained a ghost in their ledger, a mystery they could use to garner sympathy every Sunday morning. I didn't reach out because I knew the only way to save my daughter from the weight of their expectations was to ensure she never had to carry them. I thought I had succeeded, that the distance was enough, but I had underestimated the reach of a woman who felt entitled to the daughter she had raised to be her own personal safety net. On a Tuesday in September, the world I had built came to a sudden halt. A soft knock echoed at my front door, and when I opened it, there was my brother, Leo. He stood on my porch, gripping his phone and staring at me with a mixture of confusion and horror. He had been sent to find me, armed with an address my mother had finally produced. Behind me, Clara skidded into the hallway, her face a mirror of the family photos back in Ohio. Leo stared at her, then passed her to the photograph of David on my wall, and the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He didn't say a word to me, he just stared at his phone, his face draining of color, as he finally understood the deception he had been a part of for years. He turned away without finishing the call to our mother, sitting on my porch steps and weeping for the sister he had finally seen. He left behind a cream-colored envelope, a formal invitation to their homecoming service, a summons to stand before the congregation and fix the story they had all been told. I knew that invitation was not an offer of reconciliation, it was a demand for my participation in their narrative. They didn't want me, they wanted the redemption arc my mother had spent years drafting. I decided to go, not because I owed them an apology, but because I owed it to my daughter to own our truth. I arrived at the church on that Sunday morning, standing in the front row as my mother took the pulpit and began to spin the tale of her lost lamb's return. She spoke of sorrow and grace, her voice steady and practiced, expecting me to walk forward and play my part. Instead, I stood in the silence that followed her performance. I didn't have notes, and I didn't have apologies. I told them about the 6 figures I had sent to keep their lives afloat while I buried my husband and raised my child in the dark. I told them about the envelope that arrived every month, and I told them that being needed is not the same as being loved. I saw the faces of the congregation shift, the confusion turning to something uncomfortable, but I didn't care. I walked out of that church with my daughter in my arms, and for the first time in my life, I was finally, truly home.